I would love to welcome our guest today. He is Jatan Mehta, and he is a very prolific space writer. He has been writing a lot of articles about space science, about moon missions, missions of ISRO, missions of NASA, and SpaceX, and also about different planets, how they formed, and what happens in there. So I think with that, I would invite Jatan to take over the uh, session and proceed further. Yeah.
Today we are going to be learning about why to explore space, and it's going to be a fairly basic session. However, even for the more advanced people amongst us, I hope that there's some takeaway for you as well. So let me just share my presentation here and we'll begin. So these patterns in the sky are basically what was used by our ancestors to understand, okay, if the star is in a certain portion of the sky, then it is monsoon time, and that's how we plan our agricultural crops since thousands of years now. And similarly, navigators used the patterns in the sky to navigate on long sea voyages. So basically, with the invention of the telescope, we could see faraway objects in greater detail, and in turn know more about ourselves. So what Galileo did was he saw Jupiter, and he discovered that there are 4 moons around Jupiter, and these moons do not go around the earth as was thought at the time. Only now we know that, earth goes around the sun, moon goes around the earth, Jupiter goes around the sun, but that was not common knowledge 500 years ago, 400 years ago, at the time of Galileo. So he was pretty shocked to see
Excuse
that
me.
there were, yeah.
But
So
we revolve around the baby center, right?
which center?
Baby center. We actually do not revolve around the sun, if I'm not.
Yeah. But the barycenter is within the sun itself. So for all practical purposes, for a simplified explanation, we still revolve around the sun. So all right. So basically, what he was shocked that there were 4 large moons just like our moon, that were going around Jupiter and not around Earth as people had earlier thought. So that is when he understood, okay, the Earth is not at the center of the universe, and he discussed his discoveries with the public, who he thought would appreciate this new knowledge. But what happened is that the church did not approve of his discoveries. The church continued to believe for 300 years that the earth is flat and that the sun goes around the earth and not vice versa. So basically, they did not approve of his discoveries. It's only in the last century that the church agreed that Galileo was right. So here I have an example of the size of telescopes that we have made in the last century alone. So for reference, if you can see here on the bottom left where my cursor is, I have a tennis court, and on the bottom right, I have a basketball court. So that should give you some reference as to how big some of these telescopes are. Yeah, so even this small Hubble telescope, it can, when put in space, give you amazing detail. And that's what the pictures we have seen of space from NASA, a lot of them come from the Hubble Space Telescope. Now, there are some telescopes on Earth because sending things to space is hard. You cannot, rockets are not that big either. They are very big, but they're not so big that, you can put an entire building into space. That's not possible. So on Earth, we can build much bigger telescopes. So for example, just look at this where my cursor is on the top part of the screen. The Keck telescopes, this honeycomb type blue mirrors, right? So these are 2 10-meter telescopes. They are in Hawaii. So if you ever want to visit Hawaii for a holiday plan in the future, you should visit the Keck telescope. So these were the largest telescopes that people had built for a long time, and they are still among the largest. But in the next 10 years, we are planning much bigger telescopes. So just to the right of it, there's the 30-meter telescope. Uh, so that is going to go online in the next 10 years. So it's a huge 30-meter telescope. So if you imagine your house, for example, a typical house is typically 8 meters, 10 meters wide. So something 3 times, 4 times larger than your typical house along its length. So it's a really huge telescope. In some cases, it is as big as an entire building, right? And then there's the green one just below it, which is the European Extremely Large Telescope, which is about 40 meters large. With these large telescopes, we can get much more detail than we could with any other telescope till date, and we can start to understand, how large is our universe, when did it form, and when did the first stars form. So we can take on these large questions in science with the help of these advanced telescopes.
Excuse me, can I ask
Yeah.
something?
Yeah, please go on.
So in the previous slide, that hexagonal array kind of thing in the telescope, in these big telescopes, does this represent something, this hexagonal array?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Absolutely. So basically what happens is these telescopes need to be very sensitive. So what happens is that if you try to build a bigger and bigger mirror and try to keep it smooth to the very fine micrometer level, engineering wise, it's not possible to make such a smooth mirror of such a large size. So what they do instead is they make these hexagonal, relatively small mirrors and then fit them like a jigsaw puzzle and make them bigger, right? So that's how you get, that is why you see even in the 30-meter telescope and the 40-meter telescope, it's many small hexagons, right? So since we don't have the technology yet to make very large mirrors without any errors in them, because that kind of sensitivity is required for the kind of study that they do. It's an engineering limitation that we are trying to get around.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Yeah. So now these telescopes are great. Like we saw lots of these big telescopes that are coming online, and India is also part of a telescope effort called the 30-meter telescope, and which is what I showed you before. So India is part of that effort, and that will give us fantastic science. But the thing is, apart from their size, there are other things that limit a telescope on Earth. So, for example, on Earth, we know, we live in cities, and there is a lot of pollution in cities because of which, we cannot see many stars in the sky at night. Another thing that is that even if you don't have light pollution, there can always be cloud cover. So if there is a monsoon season going on, or if there's a lot of clouds, you cannot really do much about it, right? So and the other thing is, we must have seen, you must have seen stars twinkling. So twinkling stars are because of our atmosphere. Basically, you cannot see a lot of detail in the stars if the stars are twinkling because of our atmosphere. So if you want to make high resolution observations, then you cannot do that without correcting for that. And the other interesting thing is that ground-based telescopes, Earth-based telescopes can only see in certain parts of the light. What I mean by that is, so as humans, we can see these from the Vibgyor colors, right? We can see anything from violet to red and everything in between, and combinations of those colors. So black and white is covered in that. But there are so much more colors than the visible light that are there in that light can take. But the human eye cannot see that. But there are certain insects, for example, who can see in the ultraviolet, but humans can't. But however, since we have technology, we can use technology to make telescopes that can see in those respective light colors. When NASA realized in the 1960s that that there are many more colors of light that you can see if you made the technology to see that, then you would be able to see the universe in far more richer color. It would be an entirely new experience, and you would learn so much more. So what NASA did is put one telescope each for each such color of light that the humans cannot see. We already discussed Hubble that sees in the same light color as we see, but there are other telescopes like NASA Spitzer, which can see in the infrared, for example. And that is the same thing that a thermal scan is, for example. Since this is the time of the coronavirus, we know that, how do you check your body temperature with a invisible light gun? So that's infrared. And if we see the universe in infrared, then we are able to see stars that are being just born which we cannot see in the regular visual light. So that is why NASA built and launched this telescope Spitzer. Similarly, in the X-rays, which is more energetic, we are familiar with X-rays because sometimes if we have a broken bone, for example, we do an X-ray of our arm and we get to know where the problem is. So similarly, scientists can see what's going on inside a cloud of dust and gas, what's going on inside that by looking at it in X-rays. So there's a telescope called Chandra named after the Indian scientist Subramaniam Chandrasekhar, which is a NASA telescope which sees in X-rays, and then there's one for gamma rays. So basically, this is how NASA tried to study the entire universe in different colors of light and get a much better understanding. So it's very similar to how, if we have a group discussion and 4 people have different points, together there's a lot more knowledge than one individual has. So similarly, by combining different colors of light, you can have much more knowledge about the universe than you can by just looking at one color. These are telescopes which NASA built and Europe built. What about India? So for a long time, India did not have a space telescope. ISRO launched this satellite called Astrosat, and what happened is, so this is the first space telescope by India. And the interesting thing about this telescope is that it can watch the universe in multiple colors, not just one. So in the previous slide, I showed you telescopes dedicated for each color, but Astrosat can see in visible light, which is the colors that we see in. It can observe in ultraviolet, and it can also observe in X-rays.
Can it see in infrared?
No, it cannot see in infrared. So by observing the stars and the galaxies in 3 colors, it is able to get a much better perspective at the same time. So you do not need to combine data from all 3 telescopes, for example. The one telescope can do the job. So while it doesn't have the same high resolution imagery that Hubble has, it makes up for it in this way by providing a unique capability. So, and that's what is expected to be done in science, where if someone is already doing a great science work in a particular field, you try to add on to that. You do not try to repeat that. So that's what India has been trying to do with Astrosat, and that's a really good thing to do.
Sir, but isn't it possible to make a huge telescope on the International Space Station?
No. So the International Space Station has very limited areas for exposing your telescope to space. So, and plus the International Space Station also keeps moving around the Earth with its own requirements and its own goals that it has to fulfill. So oftentimes there is not a clear view to the sky if you watch from the International Space Station. So having said that, smaller telescopes have been put on the station, but for bigger telescopes, you need to make it independent. Till now, we talked about the stars and the galaxies and whatnot, but there are things in the solar system which are important to study and for which NASA and ISRO and European Space Agency put a lot of money into studying those. So here I have the image of the sun compared to the Earth. Of course, this is not a real image completely. The sun image and the Earth image are separate, but here it's just put in next to each other so that you get the sense of just how big the sun is, or alternately how small the Earth is. What you see here is one giant solar flare filament. So these things are common on the sun, right? So what happens is when the sun is very energetic. I mean, it is giving us so much light all the time, and that is generated due to nuclear fusion happening at the core of the sun. So on the surface of the sun, there's this turbulent, stormy kind of activity where it keeps on releasing these energetic, scary flares. So this material is ejected into space, and along with it, there's a lot of radiation that the sun emits, which travel from space, from the sun to the Earth, which is now visible in the presentation. So this is not a real picture. This is just an artist impression, just to give you a sense of it. So these flares from the sun and radiation from the sun travels from the sun to the Earth, and some of it makes its way into the Earth's atmosphere, and it can cause certain things to not work. For example, so there was this event in 1857, I believe, where there was a strong solar eruption on the sun, and after a few days it reached the earth. And what happened after that was, because there was a lot of radiation in it, and which reached the earth, it affected the telegraphs at the time, for example. So a lot of these towers actually got burnt or damaged because of the intense radiation from the sun. There was a power outage. So similarly, let's say now we are dependent on the internet for everything. I mean, the session is happening on the internet, and we are dependent on electricity completely for our daily lives. So if such an event happens again, and we know that keeps on happening on the sun all the time, so if such a powerful event happens again, then how do we save ourselves from such a massive outage? So that is why what we do is we put satellites in space which study the sun dedicatedly. So for example, we put satellites somewhere here where my cursor is, and we try to see, okay, if the sun emits something very large solar flare, then these satellites will now then communicate to Earth that the sun has now emitted a large solar flare, and then it might be coming in your direction, so we can be better prepared accordingly, right? And to better understand how the sun works, because it completely affects climate on Earth, so there are spacecraft that we send which go very close to the sun. So for example, this NASA spacecraft called the Parker Solar Probe, and these ESA means the European Space Agency, and India is also going to send an orbiter called Aditya, where my cursor is right now, and that will also try to study the sun and look for such activity.
How fast does it go around the sun?
Very fast, actually. Parker Solar Probe and such spacecraft go around at about 150,000 to 2 lakh kilometers per hour, and that's very fast.
What is the life of these satellites?
Depends on how they are made. In the case of Parker Probe, the life is about 10 years.
The observations which are made by the satellite, will it also depend on the position of the satellite in terms of the position of the sun? Like the Parker probe is, you said, inside the atmosphere of the sun. So even inside the atmosphere of the sun, will it the observation, will they change if where exactly the satellite is positioned inside the atmosphere?
Yeah. So basically, it's about 3 times closer than Mercury is to the sun. So it's in the outer atmosphere of the sun. And you are totally right. The observations will definitely depend on where inside the sun exactly the Parker probe is. So for example, the probe doesn't spend all of its time inside the atmosphere of the sun. It has an elliptical orbit. So which means that at some points in the orbit, it will be inside the sun. Inside the sun's atmosphere, to be precise, and at some points it will be much further away, right? So when it is further away, it will have its camera on and other sensors which will give you much more global observation. But when it is inside the sun, then it will rely on sensors, radiation, and all those instruments. So depending on where it is, the nature of the observations will change.
Sir, how much time did it take to go from Earth to the sun?
That's a very good question. So in principle, it should not take a lot of time, but because the idea is to go closer and closer to the sun, making your orbit smaller and smaller is a hard task. So Parker probe was launched in 2018, which is about 2 years ago almost, and it will take around 5 to 6 years to be able to slow down lower its orbit to the sun and be in the final orbit where it has to take the science data. So it's about 5 to 6 years.
Sir?
Yeah.
You told that it takes 5 to 6 years to go nearest to the sun.
Yes, yes.
So in case of Aditya L1, that how much estimated time that Aditya L1 is going to be take?
Okay, so Aditya L1 is very different. In this case, it is going to be much further away. So in this slide, if you can see, it will be much further away. So it will be somewhere here, let's say, in this schematic. So that's much further away from the sun and much closer to the earth. So it won't take a lot of time. It will only take a few weeks for the spacecraft to get in its final position. So now coming much closer to home and also one of my favorite subjects. So we are talking about the moon now. And in 1969, we know that humans landed on the moon. And the first person to land on the moon was Neil Armstrong. And here is a picture of that. So the moon landing was very significant because technologically it was a giant leap. And since then, we haven't really done a human landing, which is sad. But at least we did it once, and now we hope to do it again in the next 5 years or 10 years or so. But why did we land on the moon in the first place? I mean, what is so special about the moon? The first thing is that the moon is the closest astronomical body to us. So in that sense, it is very accessible. Second thing is that the moon offers a lot of scientific potential in that the moon doesn't have an atmosphere. You might have heard that Apollo astronauts, when they walked on the moon, their boot prints are still there because there is no air on the moon. So because there is no air, there is no weathering, which means that, let's say, 2 billion years ago, huge asteroid that crashed into the moon and made a big crater. That crater is still there, waiting to be studied. So if we study the moon today, we get to know how the solar system was 2 billion years ago, or even 3 billion years ago, or even 4 billion years ago. So the moon, in that sense, preserves the knowledge of the solar system. Whatever happened in the solar system 4 billion years ago, the knowledge of it is preserved in a certain sense. So all you need is a scientist and a way to go to the moon.
So how is the flag that is put on the moon furling? Because there is no air, no wind.
That is a very good question. That's a very good question. So what they did was, these flags that the Apollo astronauts put on the moon are not like the flags that we have on Earth, which is made up of cloth. The flag that you see here, they have a metal film inside. Okay, so it's a thin metal film which is connected to the metal pole. So inside this flag is a metal film, which is why it is able to hold on steadily. So it's sort of like your you have your chocolate wrapper. The wrapper is silvery in color. So that's also a sort of a metal. So a larger version of that, a stiffer version of that, is used here. China sent this lander on the moon and this rover on the moon, and the lander captured the picture of the rover and the rover captured the picture of the lander. Similarly, China sent another lander on the moon, which is on the other side. So, when you look up to the moon, you always see one side of the moon. You might have studied this in your textbooks also. So, but the other side of the moon is also there. I mean, it is not very well studied. So, which is why China sent a spacecraft, a robotic spacecraft on the other side of the moon to understand how did that form. And the other side of the moon is very different in nature than the near side of the moon. So China's lander and also a rover which looks very similar to this one again, they both are trying to understand how did that side of the moon form.
Sir, is the Chandrayaan-1 even for the other side of the moon?
Yes, in a way, yes. That's a good question. You can also put a satellite, right? A satellite doesn't land, but it keeps on going round and round around the moon. So if you have a satellite like Chandrayaan-1 or any satellite around the moon, what it can do is it can go around the moon. It can see the near side, far side. So if this is the moon and this is the near side and it is going around the moon, so it will see the near side here and then it will see the far side when it is here, and then it will again see the near side here and so on, right? Yeah, so it can see the far side of the moon.
Is why we are not trying to place people or human to the moon?
The reason is that firstly it costs a lot to send a person on the moon. The Apollo missions were the costliest missions in the entire history of space exploration. So that's one thing, but the other thing is also that it's political. And the thing is, when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, America wanted to go to the moon simply because the Soviet Union, which is now Russia, Ukraine, and other countries, they wanted to go to the moon. So it was sort of a political race between these two countries. And when America succeeded in doing that, and the Soviet Union did not, the incentive and the want to do more things and keep on sending people to moon and even the Mars, that went away. So that was unfortunate. So,
Okay.
so a lot of space exploration is also unfortunately political, whether we like it or not. But the good news is that now, since China has been making a lot of progress on the moon and in space technology, now now America again wants to go to the moon. So in 5 years or 10 years, you will be able to see America sending astronauts to the moon again, and China also wants to do that by the 2030 or so.
Sir,
Okay.
where had Kalpana Chawla then went?
She went to Earth orbit. So she was orbiting the Earth in the International Space Station.
So,
yeah.
You said about America landing to the moon, but I read somewhere it said that because of the Cold War between America and Russia, to stop this argument and to be the first one to land on any planet, America has just faked the moon landing, it seems. Is it true?
Yeah.
Sir,
No,
Area
that's
51.
not. No, that's not true, because I know there are a lot of rumors going on and a lot of websites and a lot of videos claiming that the moon landings were not correct. But even now today, we have, for example, there is a NASA orbiter around the moon, satellite around the moon called the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, LRO. So you can Google that later. What it has done is LRO has captured images of the moon at such a high resolution. When you open Google Maps and you switch to satellite view, you can see buildings and even smaller areas than that on Google Maps right now. So similarly, this NASA satellite LRO is trying to build a Google Maps of the moon, and it can see something as small as 1 meter or half a meter across. So for example, if I was sitting on the moon right now, LRO will be able to see me as 1 pixel in the image right now. So what it has done is, all the Apollo missions that went in the past, it has captured images of the spacecraft which were much larger than me, obviously. So it has captured images of those spacecraft from space.
I want to ask one question.
Yeah.
That, sir, the ISS, sir, it had been launched a long time ago and it has been orbiting the Earth continuously. So doesn't its fuel get exhausted, and the supply of oxygen, doesn't it get lowered?
That's a good question. So I'll just quickly answer that. As for the fuel part, there are two things. One is there are rockets continuously going to the International Space Station every 3 months or so. Okay, so NASA, Russia, Europe, Japan, these are the countries which keep on sending rockets. Overall, they keep sending rockets every 3 months or so to supply the space station with food, with rocket fuel, and so on. Okay, so that's one thing. As for the oxygen supply, they continuously keep on generating oxygen by having an entire circulation system built in. So that's how they generate more oxygen.
When the Apollo 11 landed on the moon, how did they launch back to Earth?
That's a good question. So basically, since the moon's gravity is very less compared to the Earth, you just need a very small rocket to get out of the moon. But if you want to get out of Earth, you need a very huge rocket. So what they did was, if you see this image, this is not the spacecraft that they used, but just to give you an idea. So this image had, if you imagine humans sitting here with an enclosure around them, of course, for their safety, and this lower area where my cursor is, there's a rocket engine that you can see if you look closely. Okay, so the Apollo spacecraft had a very similar engine which it fired and then was able to get off the moon.
Sir, doesn't India go to give the food and oxygen to the ISS?
No, unfortunately, India is not part of the International Space Station. There have been a lot of people who are trying to tell ISRO and our government and trying to suggest that we should be part of this international collaboration, but so far India has decided not to do that, and instead they want to make their own space station. These are China's spacecraft that we talked about. What has India been doing in the space? Chandrayaan-1, when it orbited the moon for 1.5 years, it discovered water on the moon. Now, to be clear, the water is not the same as the water we have on Earth, in liquid form. You can just go and drink it or put it in a bottle or something like that. The water here is hidden inside the craters, and it is in the form of ice. So it's like a deep refrigerator sort of, okay, at minus 250 degrees Celsius. So it's very, very cold, and it is inside the craters, which is very, very deep. So if you see the screen where my cursor is, you can see many blue colored dots. Okay, so what you're seeing here is essentially the north pole of the moon and the south pole of the moon.
So the oceans on Earth, even they can get evaporated because of sun heat. How come this water is not affected because of sun's heat?
Excellent question. So what happens is these water ice is buried inside the craters on the poles of the moon. Let's say this is the moon. Okay, this is the north pole of the moon, and this is the south pole of the moon, and the sun is somewhere here. Okay, and the sunlight is coming like this. If you're there on the poles of the moon, then you will see the sun very low in the sky because you're at the top, and the sunlight is coming like this, right? So sun will be very low in the sky. Now on the pole of the moon, if you have a very large crater, then those craters will have walls, right? So the sunlight will not be able to enter inside those craters, and therefore, and those craters are deep, so the craters can be as deep as 20 kilometers, for example. So if there is water ice inside that crater, then it never sees sunlight. So these blue areas on the screen that you see, those areas have never seen sunlight for 4 billion years. So it's frozen since then. So it's like a large time scale refrigerator. So the moon is like a huge 4 billion year refrigerator that we have gotten for free. So that is how the water ice there is preserved.
So why we can see that the North Pole, the blueprint of water on the North Pole is a bit more as compared to the South Pole? Is there any specific
Right. So that depends on the local, geology and the local topography. What I mean by that is, there are, you can see the craters are very different on the North Pole and the South Pole. And that's just like saying, India looks different than Africa, right? It's just the topography of where India is and where Africa is. So because the North Pole has more craters in a very dense, in a very dense fashion, it has more water ice compared to the South Pole. So if you are interested, there is an entire article I have on my blog, which talks about how NASA and India co-discovered water on the moon. So if you're interested, you can check that out for more details on the same. And now coming to Chandrayaan-2. So we all know that last year, unfortunately, Chandrayaan, the lander, the Vikram lander, unfortunately failed to land on the moon and it crashed. However, not all of it was a failure. The mission also had an orbiter, which you see on the screen right now. So this orbiter, this is an artist impression, it's not a real picture. The orbiter looks approximately like this. And the interesting thing about this is that scientifically, it has better instruments than what Chandrayaan-1 also had. And Chandrayaan-1 was very good. So now we have sent a much better orbiter because in 10 years, technology has improved and we know more about the moon than we knew before. So now what Chandrayaan-2 will do is that this water ice on the moon, it will try to not just, now Chandrayaan-1 told us, okay, where the water ice is, but it did not tell us how much water there is. So Chandrayaan-2, what it will do is, it will take more detailed observations using its radar, for example. So it has a much more powerful radar, which can penetrate inside the water ice and beam back the information about, how deep the ice is. So it will tell you not just where the water ice is, it will also tell you how much water ice there is. And that information is very critical for understanding, in the future, if you want to make a moon base, then we need to know where and how much water there is on the moon. Only then we can make a house on the moon. Now there is a NASA mission called Viper. What it will do is, as seen here in the image, so it is a rover which will land on the moon and then it will explore this pole. So it will land somewhere on this, on the north pole of the moon. It will land somewhere here where my cursor is. Okay. So, and it will go inside the crater and it will try to see if it can extract that water from the crater and use it for, and you know how easy it is to extract, what is the property of the water ice and so on. So it is like a high level technology mission by NASA, which is very interesting, and I'm looking forward to this. It will launch in 2023. So 3 years from now, you can look forward to this interesting mission launching. And it will bring us one more step closer to having a moon base. So this is an artist impression of what a moon base could look like once we know how to use the water on the moon. So once we know how to use the metal and the water on the moon, we can build, start building homes for ourselves, which are sustainable. You can see solar panels here. You can see a rocket going up from the moon. You can see astronauts taking a picture and so on. Okay, so this is what a future moon base might look like.
Sir.
Yeah.
Sir, but we would all time need to wear a spacesuit there because of the pressure and.
But not inside when you are inside the dome. So this picture that you see the open area, right? That's a cutout. This will be completely shielded. This is just opened up by the artist to show you how it will look. So inside, if you see the people are not wearing spacesuits.
So it would be maintained.
Yes, it would be maintained. Yes.
But why are we trying to make a moon base?
So that's exactly why I have my further slides. So the thing is, okay, not here. Yeah. Okay. So the thing is, a lot of people have asked, the larger question people have asked is, why do we even need to explore space? And that is also the topic of today's session. So the simplest answer possible, apart from curiosity, one is that, curiosity is one good enough answer why we need to explore space, because you want to know more about the world that you have, and the universe is so much more bigger. But if you want to get practical, the answer is that the earth is not here forever. So even if we make all the effort to make earth life better and amazing, at some point in time, someday the earth will not exist. And why? One reason is on the screen. We may have a World War III, and that's unfortunate, but it can happen. And there may be nuclear weapons used, and humanity may not survive. So that's one human reason. But there are also natural reasons. For example, the dinosaurs, how did they die? A large asteroid came from space and collided with Earth, and that completely changed the Earth's climate for a long time. And the dinosaurs simply could not survive in that toxic environment. And despite the fact that dinosaurs were on Earth for 500 million years or so, which is much, much larger than the time that we have been on Earth, despite that, they could not see the asteroid coming. So if a large asteroid comes from space and hits the Earth, and we are not able to use our technology to divert it, then life on Earth will not survive. So that's another reason why Earth may not exist, even though it's nothing that we did.
Are we prepared to launch any things with humans to the moon or any place if by chance an asteroid hits Earth?
Not right now. That's the unfortunate part. So right now, if an asteroid decides to come tomorrow, let's say, then there is no way that we can do anything about it. So even with all of our technologies, which is why the focus is on building technologies now in the future, where, let's say, if we get to know 6 months in advance that an asteroid is coming, and we get to know that via the telescopes that we built and we talked about earlier. So if we get to know 6 months in advance, we might be able to make a rocket which goes to the asteroid and tries to, divert its path so that it does not collide with Earth. So let's say, even if we are able to steer away an asteroid using our technology, even then there are threats to Earth. For example, the sun is not going to last forever. So right now the sun, it's very big, but it's still very far away. But in 4 billion years from now, the sun will start becoming bigger and bigger. So on the screen, if you can see on the left, the sun is how it is today, and the earth is where life is very comfortable. You are not, conditions on earth are not too hot, not too cold, and you can exist very nicely. But in 4 billion years or so, the sun will start becoming bigger and bigger, and that's what you see on the right. So the earth will be much more closer to the sun than it is now. And the earth will become so hot, it will be hundreds and hundreds of degrees Celsius, just like Venus and Mercury. So life on earth will not be possible, which is why you need to move to Mars. and moving to Mars is made easier if you have a base on the moon. Okay, so the moon is like our test practice because the moon is closer to us. You can test your technology on the moon. Once you know that it works, you can then deploy it on Mars. Okay, and once you have your life on Mars, you have a base on Mars, then you are safe for a very long time, but not for too long, because the sun will keep on getting bigger and bigger. So even Mars can, for example, become much hotter. So which is when we need to move to another star system. Okay, that is why we study something called exoplanets. Exoplanets are basically planets, but not around our sun. They are planets around other stars. Okay. So the stars that you see in the sky, a lot of those stars have planets around them, and we can discover those using our telescopes. We have found till date more than 4,000 such planets, and we have only looked away. It's like if you imagine the entire sky is an ocean, then we have barely looked in, you know, a bottle full of water. There's an entire ocean of stars that we have not looked at. So there are many, many more planets that are yet to be found. But even then, 4,000 is still a lot of planets, right? So, and these are in stars which are near to us. So what we started doing next was, scientists started looking at which of these 4,000 planets are planets where we can survive on, where there can be life, potentially just like there is life on Earth. So if we build a very big rocket in the future, let's say 500 years from now, can we go to this planet around other star and can we survive there? Okay, so that's the question that scientists have been trying to answer. And the fortunate answer is yes. So there have been many types of planets that we have found. So we have found Jupiter-like planets, and we have found smaller planets like Mercury, and we have found Earth-like planets. So the Earth-like planets are what we are interested in. So here we are showing in terms of size, but I also mean Earth-like in terms of conditions. So for example, these planets also exist in the right area where there can be liquid water, for example, on the surface. And it is possible that with more research, we are able to find just the right planet that we can move to in the future when our sun will not shine, or when our sun will not be feasible for having life around. And I have, you know, more details about these things on my blog as well. So if you want to know more about the details of this, I have articles on that as well. So just go to my blog and search for exoplanets and you will get all the articles on that. There's this planet whose artist impression is there on the screen. It is only 4 light years away, and 4 light years is relatively small in the large astronomical scale. So if you build a rocket, for example, which travels at 10% the speed of light, then in just 40 years, you will be able to reach this planet. And in just 40 years, just is used because it's very far away. So 40 years is really just. So, but it is acceptable if you want to live when the sun will no longer allow you to live, right? So that's one of the reasons why we put so much money in space exploration. It is because we want to survive.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but sir, there are, as you said, that in some time the sun will come closer to Earth, and then we will have to shift to planet Mars.
Right.
So, sir, there are so many people on Earth. How will all shift to Mars?
Right. That's a very good question. So it's something that we don't have an answer to yet. But the idea that people are, proposing is that if you can build very, very, very big rockets, and you can send thousands of humans in one single rocket. So over time, over many, many years and hundreds of years, you will be able to send a lot of the human population on Mars. And then shifting to another star also can be done in a similar way.
But then, sir, there is so many useful things what humans need to survive, like water.
Right.
Where will that
From where will we get that?
That's a very good question. So a lot of the water can come from the moon. For example, I just showed you that the moon has a lot of water, right? Taking water from the moon to Mars is much easier than taking water from Earth to Mars. Okay, that's one. Second is Mars also has ice poles. So even Mars can be, the poles of Mars can also be used to extract water. So that can be another water source. So we can use a lot of the metals and water and other resources available on the moon and Mars to power our future journeys. So we don't have to necessarily rely on Earth for everything. So I will just move ahead here. One of the upcoming telescopes is the James Webb Space Telescope. On the right in the screen here, where my cursor is, I have a comparison of the mirror of the James Webb Space Telescope compared to the Hubble. Okay, so you can see the James Webb is much bigger, and it is going to be the largest space telescope that will put in space. So the launch is next year sometime, and NASA and Europe are collaborating on this. The reason this telescope is very important is it's the combination of Spitzer telescope, which looks in the infrared, and the sensitivity of the Hubble telescope. So if you combine both of that and you make the mirror bigger, that is when you get the James Webb Space Telescope. So this telescope will be able to identify if there is potentially life on other planets, which we saw here, for example. So James Webb will let us know if there is a possibility of life on these planets, and even if not, it will also tell us that whether or not we can live on that planet in the first place. So that will help us plan in the future when we want to migrate as to what we should do. So that is one thing. And it will also tell us about how did the universe form, and how did the first stars of the universe came into being, and so on. Before I wrap up the session, I would like to show you something. And since you have stuck around for the entire 2 hours, I think you will be interested in this. So this is my website, jatan.space. This is where you can find articles on a lot of topics on space. So for example, these are my latest articles. I have written on Saturn, I have written on the moon, I have written on the solar eclipse. Then you will have articles on the moon specifically. So the water article which I was referring to is here. And then there are also articles on how did the Apollo mission let us know about the moon's origin. So then there are articles on planetary science as to, for example, why we should explore Venus. Then there are articles on space technology. How do we build this amazing technology that allows us to explore the solar system? So I have articles on that. Then there are articles on astronauts. So you can, if you are curious about, what experiments do the astronauts conduct when they go to the space station. So I have articles on that. I have an article on India's upcoming astronaut mission called Gaganyaan. And then there are articles on space missions like Chandrayaan-2 or the Parker probe. So some of you were curious about the Parker probe. So I have some more details on this article here. So you can check that out. And I have articles on astrophysics, and then interviews of scientists for those who are interested in that, and articles on ISRO, and so on. For those who really, really like my work, I put away a lot of my articles for completely free of cost. And, I don't have any ads on my blog or anything. So the way I earn is by writing articles for publications and by people who support me via platforms like Patreon. So if you are someone who has a job and if you like my articles, then you can consider supporting me on Patreon for a very simple cost, and you will get some benefits in return. So the link for that is available on my website. So if you just go to my website and you see this support me button here, and if you click on that, you will go to my Patreon account. So with that, I will wrap up the session.